Hey everybody, Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the extraordinary honor of pleasure of chatting with bassist, vocalist, composer, and educator, Dr. Emma Dayhuff. Yay!
Hello. Yeah.
So lots of very interesting things going on right at this particular time, but we always like to go to the past. How did you get started in music and particularly on bass?
Let's see. When I was really young, I had an older cousin who played the violin, and I wanted to be like this older cousin because she was very cool. And so I started playing the violin, but the violin didn't stick. I didn't like the sound it made. It was too high. And so then, I went to public schools in Montana where I grew up. And in 5th grade, they had kind of a choose your instrument and play music for the last year of elementary school or whatever. And so I chose that moment to quit the violin and go in the opposite direction as far as I could. And that one stuck.
Nice. You must have gotten so interested in it that you decided to, from 5th grade, to continue on with this. Tell us a little bit about that trajectory.
Sure. Yeah, I think the instrument itself kind of it exposed me to so many different just slowly exposed me to so many different kinds of music because there's a bass in everything, So it's like, even though I may have started in orchestra, then in, 2 years later, it was like the middle school jazz band needed a bass player. And so I was, handed an electric bass for the first time and played the Pink Panther, which was very exciting, and And then in high school, there was this really cool woman piano player named Ann Tappan who ran after school jazz combo type program. And she introduced me to everything from Herbie to Coltrane to, even some modern Herbie stuff. So it was like all over the genre map, from straight ahead to more funk inspired stuff. And it was just like, man, the bass is in all of this, and it does different things in all of these kinds of music. And then from there, it's almost like the bass introduced me to different kinds of music. And then those types of music introduced me to different people, and different cultures. And it has been an avenue for me to feel like I understand people in the world deeper.
Indeed.
Going in moments when it was like, do I want to keep doing this?
Nice. Well, and it has been a common thread in my conversation with people around the world. Bass, again, we have music in common as a general population, but bass very much in so many places. And again, if the diplomats of the world could adapt the philosophy of the bass players, we'd be in a much better place because we can get along and collaborate. It's just like, okay, this is how this is. So then you pursued further studies because, again, you've gone all the way up to a doctor's degree in this. Tell us a bit about that journey.
Well, I was kind of burnt out after I went to Oberlin for my undergrad. And when I finished that, I was a little bit burnt out. And so I took some time off. I didn't play the bass for almost 3 years. And I did a whole bunch of other stuff. I was just kind of like, what might, I was a campaign manager. I worked in politics. I was a paralegal. I was a cobbler, which I fixed shoes. And then I missed music in general. And so I did an internship at Chicago's WFMT, which is their classical music radio station. And the long story short is, through that radio station, I met people who were recording music, and I started working for the Chicago Symphony as a recording engineer. And I worked there as a recording engineer for a long time. And it was nice to be in music. And then I started missing being on the other side of the microphone. So I picked up the bass again and started just kind of, in front of the mirror playing major scales, because it's like all the information was still here, but the muscle memory was gone. So I slowly had to kind of just get the strength back. And then that just kind of took over my curiosity about, I think it was the hardest thing I ever tried to do, like really play music at a very high level. It was such a challenge. And it was a challenge that felt like you could never actually get to where you wanted to be, because as soon as you got to that place, there was more. I think that became so intriguing, that I just went that route. I moved to New York and played with everybody and their mother in New York and went broke. And yeah, I ran out of money, and then my apartment got bed bugs, and I had to wave the white flag a little bit at New York. I was like, you win, like I've lost this round. And I was like, what should I do next? And kind of as just to have one more thing to work towards, I did the audition for the Monk Institute, and I made it through the first round, and that gave me the next thing to work towards, which was the kind of in-person audition. And then I made it into that ensemble. So I got my master's degree I entered the Monk Institute and graduated the Herbie Hancock Institute because it changed names while I was in it. And we graduated in the middle of the pandemic.
Oh.
June of 2020 is when we graduated. So there was no work. And when my lease was up, I had to leave LA and kind of go back to Chicago's always kind of been where I go back to, that I know I'm going to be okay. Something about the people in that city, maybe partly the affordability of the city. It's always been a place where I know I can, I'm going to be fine. I'm using my skills to support myself. And so I went back to Chicago, and that's when my old teacher at Oberlin, Peter Dominguez, where I got my undergrad, he called me and he said, I just took a new job. I took over Richard Davis's studio at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And so I'm trying to build up this new studio. And would you be interested in helping me maybe run outreach programs? And he said, I can get you a little bit of money, but you have to get another degree. So that's how I ended up working towards my doctorate.
Nice.
I went up there to work with Peter.
Very cool.
And that was really like much more rewarding than I expected, actually. I mean, it was more work than I expected, but it was near Chicago. So it gave me a stipend in the middle of the pandemic, which was useful. And it gave me the space and time to kind of reconnect with Chicago. And then also, as part of my dissertation research, actually explore my voice as, because Chicago's where I really learned how to play first. And so my dissertation research was about the history of Chicago, and then also specifically the history of the South Side of Chicago and the artists, the kind of lineage of artists that come out of the South Side of Chicago, because my mentors came from there. And that's really kind of how I started to understand myself and my own voice as an artist too, was that process. So
very cool. Very cool. Well, and kind of along that line, you do have a new release that is out, Innovations and Lineage, the Chicago Project.
Yes, sir.
So tell us about that lovely piece. It's got 7 tracks, and they seem to have, I think they're as I'm listening to them, I'm going, I think this goes with the title. So please expand. Yeah.
So kind of what I touched on is that was the culmination performance of a lot of the research I did about Chicago and Chicago's artistic and musical traditions and history. So I asked a couple of my teachers and mentors in Chicago, people I, love playing with and taught me how to play, or I asked them to do this concert with me. And so the people are Kahil Al-Zabar on percussion, Dee Alexander on vocals, and then the young Isaiah Collier on tenor saxophone, and Isaiah played piano on one of the pieces too. I think I had gone through many years of writer's block as well, and something about part of what I wanted to do with kind of adjacent to the research aspect was to also kind of create my own original music based on, in honor of the music that I had been researching and the musicians that I had been researching, as well as to complement the people I actually hired to play with me. So writing music specifically for Kahil and Dee, and Isaiah can do anything, so I didn't know about him too much, but we had maybe an hour rehearsal, if that.
Wow.
So this was a live recording, and I just knew I had to write music that was stylistically complementary to how Kahil and Dee, perform music, and then also simplistic enough that conceptually, once we kind of got started, they would be like, oh, okay, I get it. Like no left curve balls or curve balls, everything, necessarily. But that it would also give us a huge amount of space to improvise and bounce off of each other and create an atmosphere together. Like simplicity allows for that process to happen. And so this was the live performance. And I originally recorded it kind of just to have it for myself, as like a springboard for what to do next. And then it turned out to be such a magical night. And listening back to it was like, wow, like it comes through in the recording so well that I had Kahil and Dee and Isaiah listen to it. And I said, what do you guys think about turning this into a record? And they were like, we think it's great. Go for it. And so that's how the record became what it is. And we're very proud of it. So
nice. Well, and a couple of things that I noticed culturally, there are notes, there's some African, because there's a kalimba, especially on Jaribu, there's a tempo. And then, of course, then you got some Chicago-ish blues on the tail with Dig Dis. And so with all of those reaches, and then with the musicality itself, it's a very unique sound because you have such a prominent place. And a lot of times when you'll hear like even a jazz trio, you'll have like drums, bass, piano, where the piano is the big voice there. Bass is just backing them up and tied in with the drums. And you're kind of like, but I hear so much of you because there's a lot of places where it's just you and the percussionist. And the vocals will drop in at some point, the horn will jump in at some point, but you're carrying a lot of that musical load with both the melody and percussive elements that upright can do. So it is a very different mix than what I think many people would expect from this kind of group of musicians.
Yeah, well, with the exception of the track that Isaiah plays piano on, it's chordless quartet, which really does give me a lot of freedom and gives the recording, as far as the bass goes, a ton of clarity. Like you really can hear a lot of the intricacies of what I'm playing. And for me, it's interesting because I was kind of, like I said, in the early stages of understanding my own contribution as an artist and as a bass player. And so I can hear kind of phrasings and ways that I've refined further from when that was recorded I kind of like, I've never heard other people play some stuff on the bass that it was like, as soon as I started to hear, listening to myself, as soon as I started to hear things that I'd never really heard anybody else do, that's when I was like, I'm on to something.
Nice.
It's like, it's unique. And it comes from studying with Kahil and the drummer Vincent Davis, who plays with Roscoe Mitchell, and Junius Paul, who plays in the art ensemble. It's like, I've found inspirations from peers and mentors in Chicago and kind of made it my own. And that's when I was like, I should go further in that direction because it's pretty cool.
Very cool.
And hear that start to happen in this record. So that's what I like.
Indeed. And in the mix, that's also another thing that it tends to pop, because I find that a lot of recording engineers are a little gun shy on bass, particularly. They tend to try to, and I've unfortunately had CDs that they've sent me for review, and they're amazing players, but they've muted them down in the mix so low that there's this muffled. I'm like, what did they do? Put him in a box? Because I know this guy. I've heard this guy. He plays so well. But all and you're like, and even worse when they give him an opportunity to solo, because now you hear a busy. You're like, what's he go? What's that? He's trying to break out, or what's going on here? So with that, we can always talk a little bit about sound. And predominantly with my electric players, there's the gear acquisition syndrome and the eternal quest for the perfect bass and instrument. But how are you getting your sound? And maybe even particularly with this recording, how did you mic yourself to get such a crystal clear sonic footprint?
Wow. Well, as far as microphones, I'm trying to remember. We might actually have to kind of call Buzz up and be like, hey, you remember what microphone you put in front of the bass? So Buzz Kemper was the recording engineer for the live concert. And so I don't know what he used as a microphone, but I think it's a combination because we used I think it was a DI. I think it was a DI rather than like the direct out of an amplifier. You know what I mean? So I think it was a DI plus whatever microphone Buzz used. A lot of it is just the upright that I have. She's a beast. And I bought that bass maybe 2 years ago now from A440 in Chicago. I brought the bass that I was playing a lot at the time that I've had this little tiny 5/8 size upright bass for 20 years. And I brought it in to get the sound post exchanged, and they were like, well, while you wait, you could just play basses. They have 25 basses sitting along the wall. And so I started playing basses, and I picked this one up, and it was like, it was like, how do you know my stuff? It was like talking to the bass, like, how do you know my stuff already? It's like all this stuff was coming out just like without, just effortless.
Nice.
I kind of enjoyed the experience, and I got my bass and I left. But it, like, for the next 2-3 days, it was in the back of my mind, like, I tour. And so touring as an upright bassist, you get a different bass every night. So you get used to playing a lot of different basses, in succession. And I've played really crappy basses, really amazing basses. And this one, it just wouldn't leave my brain.
Wow.
I was like, what is it about that bass? Like, it literally felt like it knew how I wanted to play almost more than I did. It was the weirdest experience. And so I was like, it was probably a fluke. And I called Mike at A440 and I said, can I come back next weekend and play that bass again? Can you like not sell it for the next 5 days? And he was like, yeah, I'll put it on hold for you. Just come back on Saturday or something, And I came back and I had the exact same experience playing it a second time. So then it was like, oh, it was like, whatever swear word you want to put in this is like, I'm about to drop too much money, And so I bought the bass, and it's only gotten better. Like, that bassist, it just sounds incredible. And then the other thing I have to give props, as far as the bass sound, I have to give props to Sean Owens, who was the mixing engineer. And we went back and forth about the bass sound, mostly so I listen to music in my car. I feel like a lot of people listen to music in their car, right? And some of the most satisfying music to listen to in the car is like hip hop and neo soul, because the bass is so huge and present and clear. And so I was like, I want this record to be, I don't want, like, when you get in the car and there's that road noise that often just drowns out the bass, and like jazz records can sound really thin in the car because of that reason. I was like, I want this to be mixed a little bit differently so it has a more modern edge as far as the low end is concerned. And you get in the car and you can still listen to it, and it sounds warm and big and balanced. And so I remember, like, we were trading, like I was sending Sean like tracks from Tribe Called Quest to like listen to the bass in this track, or I was sending him, I can't remember what else, some James Brown stuff, but just stuff that has really clear, punchy, and big kind of bass sounds as far as how things are mixed. And he really, especially for a live recording, I think he did an absolutely beautiful job making that record sound intimate and almost like it was in a studio, just clear and intimate and big. And like you said, a lot of it, I have to give a lot of that credit to Sean too.
I would have sworn it was a studio recording. It was that clean.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So as we look forward, what plans? Yeah, I understand you have a tour out of the country coming up here pretty soon.
Yeah, I'm playing with a pianist named Rachel Eckroth, and we recorded a trio record. And so it's Rachel Eckroth on keys, myself, and drummer Tina Raymond out of Los Angeles. We recorded a record in March that is, I think, 2 or 3 tracks have been released, and the whole kind of EP will be released, in 2 weeks or something. So to support the release of that record, we have a week-long European tour in the second week of October.
Very cool. And if people want to know where you're going to be, because I'm sure more exciting things will be forthcoming, where's the best place for them to look?
There are 2 places. I try to keep my website up to date. It's emmadayhuff.com. And then also I'm on Instagram, and I tend to be marginally active on Instagram. And my tag on Instagram is Emma K Day. So EMMA, the letter K, and then DAY.
Fabulous. Well, we appreciate you sharing so much about this recording and your journey as a musician and the exciting news. Folks, make sure you check out this new album. And if you have a chance to see Emma live somewhere in a venue near you, make sure you do that. Folks, you've seen her here on Bass Musician Magazine, Dr. Emma Dayhuff.
Thank you, Raul. I appreciate your very insightful questions.
My pleasure.
Thank you.